In this Diablo 4 video, I'm going to be showing you my Storm Tempest Druid build. This is a continuation of the Stormcaller build, which is a lightning-focused Druid build. And this is aimed at World Tier 3 and clearing Helltide and Nightmare Dungeon content. I'm going to be focusing a little bit less on the skills in this video since they're very similar to the previous video, and more on the equipment side of things so that you guys kind of get a better understanding of what you'll be shooting for when you get to this part of the game. But before I get into those, let's kind of recap what this build is all about. This is a storm-focused build using storm skills and dealing lightning damage. And Lightning Storm is our core skill, or our bread and butter skill for this build. And we find even more ways to take advantage of its extremely good AoE in this build. One notable change, though, is that I have swapped out the Poison Creeper in exchange for the Boulder skill, and the reason for this is because of the aspect of natural balance, which provides your storm skills critical chance for 4 seconds after casting an Earth skill. And you can cast this skill every 10 seconds, so you'll have about a 40% uptime on this bonus, and obviously higher if you have any cooldown reduction at all. And Boulder also deals significantly good damage. It pushes enemies away, it slows them, and it gives you some breathing room. And as with the previous build, the Stormcaller, Lucky Hit still plays a large role in this version, as there are many synergies that benefit from it. Overcharged Aspect, Energize, Overload, Elemental Exposure, Bad Omen, Electric Shock, and Execute on your weapon are all parts of this build that require lucky hits to trigger, which is far more than your average build. Because of this, you'll have to look out for jewelry and gauntlets that have lucky hit chance to further increase the likelihood of these triggering. Crowd control also plays a large part of this build since Storm Druids gain increased damage to stunned and immobilized enemies as well as slowed and knocked back enemies via various passive skills they have. So crowd controlling enemies not only protects you, but it also fuels your damage even further, so it's best to apply these effects before going to town with Lightning Storm. So moving into the equipment that we use for this build, let's talk about the weapon first, and I like to use a two-handed staff for this because they always come with damage to crowd control enemies, which as I mentioned earlier is a large focus of this build. Crowd controlled enemies are any enemies that are slowed, stunned, immobilized, knocked down, taunted, feared, dazed, tethered, chilled, or frozen. Storm Druids focus mainly on immobilized, stunned, slowed, and knocked down, and they have many ways of accomplishing these things. This is quite a long list of things. I'm not going to go through them all verbally, but I will put them all up on the screen here so you can just read them if you want. That way you can pause it, otherwise you can just move on. Damage bonuses that you want to look out for on your staff are damage to distant enemies, vulnerable damage, damage to crowd-controlled enemies, and core skill damage. Distant enemies are any that aren't in melee range, and even though you will use Storm Strike to regain spirit, you will more often than not be doing the bulk of your damage to enemies not in melee range. Enemies are vulnerable all the time with this build, so it's a great bonus to have. Both Storm Strike and Cyclone Armor set this effect easily, as does Cataclysm, and you'll gain passive vulnerable triggers from Elemental Exposure as well. What's great about this bonus is that it's also effective against bosses, but bosses cannot be crowd controlled, so damage against crowd controlled enemies will not apply to bosses. Damage to crowd control enemies is great because it covers all types of crowd control though. That way you don't have to worry about whether they're knocked back, or slowed, or stunned, or immobilized, and you can just deal increased damage anyway. This will also increase your damage when playing with other players that use other forms of CC as well, which is a nice added benefit. And lastly is core skill damage. This will boost Lightning Storm's damage, which is where the bulk of your damage comes from, so definitely take this one if you can find it. Ideally, your staff would have all 4 of those bonuses, or 2 or 3 of those bonuses and something else on it that would be applicable to your build. Move along to armor. For armor, I like to focus on damage reduction and maximum life. Maximum life is great for this build because you heal for 3% of it when you're using nature magic skills if you have the Circle of Life passive maxed out. The higher your max HP, the more you'll heal for, and obviously the harder you'll be able to kill. You can gain more max life by slotting rubies into your armor pieces. Ranks to Lightning Storm and Boulder are also not bad either on your armor, with Lightning Storm being the preferred of the two, obviously, since we use this the most. But Boulder is also not bad. For gauntlets, you want to look for lucky hit and crit chance if you can, since both of these are needed for this build. These are the most important bonuses on these pieces that you can have, so keep them even if they are lower level and have less armor. When it comes to jewelry, you'll want to prioritize lucky hit and critical hit chance just like gauntlets if possible. Lightning damage, critical damage, and ranks of storm or nature skills are also good here, as is cooldown reduction. These will be some of your best bonuses, so keep lower level ones that have more of the ones you want over higher level ones that don't have them all. Legendary aspects you want to be on the lookout for are as follows: Overcharged Aspect, Aspect of the Lightning Dancer, Runeworker's Aspect, Aspect of Natural Balance, Aspect of Might, and Aspect of the Protector. These all work together to improve your lightning damage as well as help protect you from damage. Aspect of Protector should be included in nearly every build simply because it's that good, and you can get it very early on in the game. Once you hit level 50 and unlock the Paragon system, you'll begin hunting for glyphs to slot in your glyph board, as well as picking up other bonuses. There are a few good choices for glyphs for this druid build, and these are Fulminate, Earth and Sky, Human, Spirit, and Exploit. Fulminate increases your lightning damage to healthy and injured enemies, which is great, along with boosting your overall lightning damage. Earth and Sky increases your damage to vulnerable or crowd-controlled enemies, which synergizes very nicely with this build. Human increases your damage while in human form, while also decreasing the damage you take. It's always good to get offense and defense from the same glyph. Exploit increases your damage against vulnerable enemies and also makes it so you set vulnerable when you damage an enemy. This lasts 3 seconds but can only trigger once every 20 seconds per enemy. Still, this is a great way to boost your DPS. Spirit increases your critical strike damage as well as increases the damage you deal to enemies you critically strike. Eventually, you'll be getting the Thunderstruck board as well, which will further boost your Storm skill damage against vulnerable and CC'd enemies, but you won't be getting that for quite some time. Final tips. Remember to upgrade your gear at the blacksmith and jeweler in order to increase the effectiveness of your gear. The game slows down a lot at this point in terms of leveling, so you can use a piece of gear much longer than you could on tier 2. This can help you out a lot. Use elixirs to not only boost your damage, but to increase your XP gain. They're not hard to craft, and you should have a bunch of materials by this point of the game. They can make your dungeon clear speed a bit better if you know the enemy type you'll be facing. You might need to enter the dungeons first to see what's inside before using them. Don't forget to boost your defenses and look for good armor with good defensive bonuses on it. Players have a tendency to prioritize offense in games like these, and they will have trouble in Helltides if they're not careful. You lose half of the resource that you gain while doing Helltides that you're carrying if you die, so staying alive is important. Lastly, always use Cataclysm at the first sign of danger. This skill can single-handedly change the course of an encounter and can absolutely melt bosses in seconds. Use it and love it.